Hello, everyone, and welcome to Keeping the Momentum, Theater's Role in Social Justice. My name is Karani Rosemecker-Tichon. I am Independent Shakespeare Company's Artistic Associate for Social Justice. In the midst of this current movement to dismantle systemic white supremacy, some ask the question, what is theater's role in social justice? Does everything have to be political? Can't you just sing and dance so we can escape for a few hours? Well, the answer to that question is theater always has been and always will be political. From the ancient art of Japanese no theater to Shakespeare's histories to Brecht's aesthetic to Cabaret's indictment of fascism to Augusto Boal's theater of the oppressed to Ntozake Shange's intersectional centering of Black women and for colored girls. Theater has and always will create empathy and spark conversations and activism that brings about change. So, how do we as theater artists respond to this current moment? Well, to answer that question, please welcome our panelists.
Sophina Brown is an award-winning theatrical producer and founder of the Support Black Theater organization. She is also an actress with series regular credits on Shark, Numbers, and currently on Lena Waithe's series 20s. Aisha Kabia has been part of the ISC family since our early days in Barnsdall Park. In her 8 seasons with ISC, she has played Lady Capulet in Romeo and Juliet, Thaisa in Pericles, both Titania and Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Queen Elizabeth in Richard III, just to name a few. She has also performed at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in addition to her numerous television and commercial credits. Bruce Lemon Jr. is an actor, writer, director, and producer. He is the current artistic director of the Watts Village Theater Company and associate artistic director of the Cornerstone Theater Company. He is also a company member of the Illyrian Players and Collaborative Artists Block. Dominic Taylor is no stranger to ISC, having been featured in our latest Art Break podcast, and he gave a brilliant lecture to accompany ISC's Iambic Lab reading of Bright Swords earlier this year. He is a writer, director, and scholar of African American theater and serves as the interim chair of the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. Sabra Williams has graced the ISC stage as the Bawd and Dionysa in Pericles, Mariah in Twelfth Night, and Tamara in Titus Andronicus. She is the co-founder of Creative Acts, a social justice organization that uses the arts as a tool for transformation. She is also co-founder of the Actors Gang Prison Project and was named a champion of change by President Obama in 2016.
Hello, everybody. I'm bringing in all of our panelists.
Hey.
Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us. I just want to acknowledge that we are all gathering here together today on the land. We need to always make sure that we acknowledge that. So we are going to get started with our discussion. Again, feel free to ask any questions that you have in the chat. We will have a question and answer section at the end of the evening. So to start us off, would someone like to start by speaking about theater as advocacy through a historical lens?
Hi. Thanks for inviting me. Welcome, everybody. I can start with that. One of the challenges about theater as a place of advocacy is theater always engages in social change. The question that we ask ourselves is theater a change for the positive or change for the negative? But it always engages in social change. And theater in the Americas has always been part of a social justice piece in so many ways. And social justice, I'm sorry, let me be clear. African-American theater. Now, I am going to frame African-American theater with the capital T theater that we represent. So I'm not going to talk about ritual. I'm not going to talk about spiritual understanding. I'm not talking about the myriad of ways in which from 1619 going forward, we have engaged Black people, African-based people in modes of resistance. So I'm going to remove ritual and spiritual constructions, and I'm actually going to start with theater. So when I'm looking at theater in the Americas, America started in 1789, and the first African-American theater company, what was called in the newspapers the African Grove Theater Company, although James Hewlett and William Alexander Brown called their theater the American Company, was a really interesting group of African-American men and women who performed in the Lower East Side in Manhattan. And one of their acts of resistance, I mentioned this, is they performed in 1821 a play called King Shadaway. And King Shadaway was a play that dealt with the revolution of Saint-Domingue, the Haitian Revolution directly. And the Haitian Revolution just ended in 1714. Forgive me. In 1814, the Haitian Revolution ended. 1791 to 1814. So it ended 7 years prior to this production. So the African Grove Theater, or the American Grove Theater, was putting on a show about the Haitian Revolution in a land in which slavery was still the law of the land. They're really significant because 1821, we were still, as a nation, trying to figure out what we were, how we were engaging in a nation that was built primarily on anti-Blackness as a way of understanding being an American. And so the African Grove Theater was really significant, as was William Wells Brown's work, different William Brown. 1847, he had a play called The Escape or A Leap for Freedom. And inside that play, what he was trying to do in terms of a resistance mode was he was actually taking the stories that we had and we're trying to reposition them. And one of the great things that I think he did in that work was he took popular minstrel songs of the day and tried to remake them into freedom songs. In the third act, there's a song called Dandy Jim, in which he took a popular song, Dandy Jim of Caroline, and made it a revolutionary song. Instead of being the happy slave in the song, it was about being revolutionary in the song, which was kind of stunning. And that was 1857 is when he did that. Then, of course, you've got all the other kind of modes of performance that existed. But I'm going to mention two movements that predate the Black Lives Matter movement today, which so William Wells Brown and the African Grove Theater are individuals, they're precursors, as were Maria Stewart, the journalist who predated Ida B. Wells in terms of dealing with African-American resistance modes. But the movements that I want to mention are the Harlem Renaissance and the Black Arts Movement. So the Harlem Renaissance, the movement at the beginning of the 20th century that is most attributable to Elaine Locke and W.E.B. Du Bois's book, which was then titled The New Negro, in which the phrase "for us, by us, about us, and near us" as the criteria for Negro art became a rallying cry. I mean, Du Bois really thought, and it's written in The New Negro, which was edited by Elaine Locke, that the function of art is to use beauty to set the world right. So the Harlem Renaissance was an interesting mechanism of performance that was really predicated on uplifting Blackness, but also taking the shackles or the mantle of white supremacy or anti-Blackness and removing them. It was also very significant because they were trying to come up with new forms. I don't want to be remiss, although I am talking about theater, about two other moments that were happening at the beginning of the 20th century. One was this major push in education in the South, which was embodied by Booker T. Washington, which is a controversial being. The Tuskegee Institute is not a controversial institution, but he's a controversial being. But one of the reasons why I mention him when we're talking about performance or theater, the so-called Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, was written for Du Bois by James Weldon Johnson Booker T. Washington, Lift Every Voice and Sing, was written for Booker T. Washington as he was to make a presentation at a Florida all-boys school. Booker T. Washington in the South and Du Bois in the North were these like polar challenging spaces. And one was people look at them differently. But the only reason why I mention them is both of them use theater in their particular context, theater makings, to try to gain or regain their position. So I think that Du Bois and Booker T. Washington were challenging individuals at the beginning of the 20th century. The Harlem Renaissance, or the new Negro movement of the 1920s, was unbelievably significant and is a precursor to all of the stuff that we're doing today. There is a third person who I should probably mention, the Black nationalists of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Although they didn't do theater, that's Marcus Garvey. And if you know anything about Marcus Garvey and the UNNIA, their entire existence was pageantry to combat what they saw was a problem, and they were Black nationalists. So I want to make this clear historically. At the beginning of the 20th century, we had three different theatrical modes that were operating. One was operating with the engagement of the institutions that we had, which one could say, this is Du Bois and Alain Locke. This is theater by us, for us, about us, and near us. Booker T. Washington was using educational theater in the South primarily, controversial being, but he still wanted to use theater, performance making as a way for people to be uplifted. And Marcus Garvey, with the Black nationalists, or UNIA, engaged in a significantly different way of theatrical presentation, which is theatrical presentation in everyday life. Okay, now I'm going to jump ahead 50 years to the 1960s and the Black Arts Movement. In the Black Arts Movement, probably people know of Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Baraka, Ed Bullins, and Ntozake Shange, who, although she's like the granddaughter of this movement. Inside that space, it was really significant to, as Larry Neal said, we want to kill Dick and Jane. And he was talking about Dick and Jane and these archetypal Western stories that existed where Black people were often removed. And so the push inside the Black Arts Movement was really to find new forms and to really engage in theater in a robust way. The Black Arts Movement was the sister or brother movement of the Black Power movement. And so it was all over the country. Ed Bullins was in San Francisco. Sonia Sanchez is in Philadelphia. We had Hakeem Matabuti in Chicago. We had Amiri Baraka in New York. We had people in DC. There's a variety of people who are moving this work throughout the nation. But the Black Arts Movement was so significant in the 1960s because it is the movement that made Ntozake Shange write for Colored Girls. August Wilson credits it as a major source. Charles Fuller. There's so many writers, including Aisha Rahman, PJ Gibson, a bunch of writers who helped shape what we call contemporary theater today. So if you wanted to hold with pillars that are 50 years apart, the Harlem Renaissance in the 1910s, 1920s, the Black Arts Movement in the 1960s, and now we're in a new moment in which social justice is central to our theatrical practice. But that kind of gives a historical pillar space for people to go forward and think of it. Yeah, that's it for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Dominic. Does anybody want to add to that discussion before we move on to our next question? No? All right. So now that we've touched on theater for social change through a more historical lens, is there someone who would like to speak to examples of theater as advocacy for social justice and activism in our current moment?
Is that me? I can speak to it.
Okay.
Yes, hi. So I think I look at theatre through the eyes of a immigrant European woman of color who's lived in this country a long time, but was brought up in a country where we actually had the arts in the core of the school day. So I think for me, not just theatre, but the arts in general, I've learned everything about the power of the arts to make change in prison. And I say that because I've been working, excuse me, inside prisons for about 15 years and started with a theatre program. And I guess that what I've been educated to understand is, first of all, equity and access are like super important. And, you know, just listening to what was just said, the quote, the function of art is to use beauty to set the world right. Prison is strategically made as ugly and soul crushing as possible. And so what I've seen is when you have the arts in that space, everything can be transformed. And so what I feel quite strongly about this country is that we view the arts, theatre, all of the arts and artists as being, we view the arts as for artists or for entertainment. And what we don't understand is the essential nature of the arts for being fully human, something that Indigenous or Indigenous cultures deeply understand. And, you know, they consider artists shamans and the arts medicine. And so for me, what I've understood is the urgency of having access to the arts, not to become artists. None of the thousands of people that I've taught have become artists. They're way too smart and they don't like unemployment. But what they do is they use the tools that the arts can bring, which I could talk more about later, what tools the arts bring and what benefits the outcomes of arts programs are for impacted society, cultures. But they use those in their lives to make different emotional choices, to be work ready, to, you know, heal the trauma of being incarcerated. And so I guess it's given me a new focus on what it is I do. And I think especially in Los Angeles, where, you know, the industry in Los Angeles is so much predicated on how you look and how much you're working, what kind of jobs you're working on. Are you on a film or on TV? But we've lost a lot of, you know, the essential nature of the arts to make social change. And we lose a lot when we lose that. And so I guess what I would say is at this time right now of radical reimagining, what I'm seeing a lot is a desperate clinging on to the kind of corporate, white, male version of theatre, which is what's so deeply embedded in our culture right now, and trying to make it what I call theatre light, you know, to try to push aside the real deep work that we do as theatre artists, that, you know, the self-reflection that this work can give us, and just to make it as closely aligned to what it's always, or what we've seen it as being in this country. So we have a chance right now to really radically reimagine, and that means doing the inside work. And so what we do in my organization, Creative Acts, is use the arts in the process of making that change as a tool to make change. And of course, not surprisingly, it's a very effective and safe space to make that internal change. And I can talk more about that later, but there's a lot of people to speak.
Would anyone want to add to that discussion before we move on to our next question?
You know, I think it's obviously all well. I feel like it's obvious, or it's been obvious to many of us how this is all connected. And while we're doing this, how many of us have been using the arts and theater for social change. A lot of the a problem has been our ability to do that in a safe working environment, a healthy working environment, a nurturing working environment that isn't structured around working you to death and disrespecting you or disregarding you or neglecting to like give adequate weight to your stories and your experiences, you know. And it's always been a tool that we've used, but the systems in which we work within them has always been bad for us because it's all built with white supremacy in the very fabric of our organizations and our working practices and all that. So, you know, there's got to be a way that we can sustain ourselves while we also do that work, because it is so important, because art is so transformative. And there's so many skills that you get from studying and practicing theater, whether you want to be an artist or not. As Sabra told about the thousands of people that she's trained that have used all the skills that you pick up just as you're crafting just the art of storytelling. And we're all storytellers, and that's how we communicate naturally. That's how we say what we want. That's how we demand what we want. I can keep talking about this, but let's have a conversation.
Yeah, I think that I would just add to that really quickly, as someone who has worked as an educator with youth and at-risk youth. Like, there's no way to express how transformative art can be. And we all know that. And the frustrating thing that can happen in these organizations is sometimes it becomes so focused on the final product, because we have to get funding, we have to get donors. So it's like, what can we do? How can we have the kids ready so they can see what they're doing and what they learn? And then sometimes we're so caught up in trying to get the funding that the actual work and the actual transformation can get lost, which speaks to what happens in this capitalist system. Does anybody else want to add to that discussion?
I just wanted to add to what Bruce said, because he was talking about self-care and working in prison for 15 years. People always ask, well, aren't you depressed at the end of the day? Or, how do you stay sane? Or how do you not take on the trauma? And I realized eventually that the reason that there's so much joy in the room is because we're working as partners. We're not like the professor that comes in with all the information and we fill them up with information. So we're actually creating a different culture. And I think that's what a practice can do. So we're doing the work internally at the same time that we're asking other people to do the work. And to me, that is the essential point of this revolution that's happening right now. If we don't do our internal work as well, in the future, we're going to become the oppressors. So we have to, thanks for showing that photo. We have to, perfect timing. And that one too, that's a bit of self-care I'm doing there.
Totally.
We have to do the work as well as asking other people to do the work, I guess is what I'm saying. Oh my God. Stop, Karani.
I had to do it. I told you I would. All right, awesome.
Yeah, we're talking about working for impact, not just for the sake of creation and sake of doing the art. Like, you're working for impact, and it's feeding. I think personally for me, I think working for impact, and like even when you're like toiling and doing long hours and all that stuff, but when it's for something more than just to distract people for a good 2 hours, like it fills me up. It fills me better, but it is draining. It is very draining. Sometimes I just want to do something that's happy, but we know this is a powerful tool to create change. We know this is a powerful tool to change minds, and to heal and to help people heal. It's just too valuable of a tool to burn out the people that are trying to do it at the same time, while we're navigating other systems, while we're navigating all the system of oppression, while we're also working to dismantle them, while we're also working to help ourselves through them, all with the same tool.
Yeah, this is one other thing that I think the other challenge about it is placing it on a timeline. I mean, you mentioned this, Karine, when you're talking about the product. I think the thing about, and I'm sure everybody's had this experience, when you have the changing of mind might not happen at the end of the 6 weeks or the 10 weeks or whatever time you're there with them. Do you know what I'm saying? It could be 2 years later. It could be a year later when somebody has a realization or when you have the realization. So I think that one of the things about dismantling a mindset or changing people's spirits inside, outside, putting it on a timeline to say, this could happen right now. When I worked at Penumbra, Penumbra is an African-American theater in Minnesota. It used to always make me chuckle when our education department would get some grant and then we'd have to have some outcome that's going to be 10 weeks later. And I'm like, you can't turn around this in 10 weeks. This is going to happen in 2 years or 3 years. But the fact that we're in this capitalist, it's kind of like the assembly line correction of race or racism in some way. Like, boom, you did it. You did the show. They wrote the thing, blah, blah, blah. We should have all problems solved. It's like, it doesn't work that way. And I think that it can be frustrating for the makers of it. I mean, the makers, the teachers, the sharers of this experience. But I always tell the people that I work with, it's like, don't put yourself on the timeline. The timeline is long. The journey is long. We just got to take our time and just, it's chopping wood every day. We take little pieces, just little pieces all the time. That's it. Yeah.
Yes. Amen to that. All right. So moving on to our next question. So we've all seen the We See White American Theater letter that was written by a bunch of BIPOC artists speaking to this moment and a lot of systemic racism within the theater community. So would anyone like to speak to the current shift that we are seeing in our theater community right now, at large, in Los Angeles, all of it?
I think it's kind of happening in a bunch of different places. It could be happening internally within you. It could be happening within your organization. And it's definitely happening across the nation. I think it totally scared the crap out of a lot of people. First of all, a lot of companies, a lot of old companies, for sure, because it feels like being called on the carpet. And it is. It very much is. But these aren't like when the initial letter hit, but then it's followed up with all these stories. If you follow the Instagram page, you see all these stories, all these accounts, and these are stories that we've heard before. I know I've heard them before. These are stories of an unsafe work environment and unsafe business practices and like an unhealthy environment for us to create and exist in. So then the demands finally have hit. And, people are reacting in various different ways. Some companies are going through and trying to see where they align and where they need to do the work. Like we are at Cornerstone Theater Company. We're like going through this document and having these internal conversations and talking about the work and talking about how we do the work as a company and as individual artists. Others are running from it or not responding. And then there are others who are also doing this timeline, trying to put yourself on a timeline for when you're going to solve racism, when you're going to of white supremacy culture. But it's not going to happen. We're not going to have a ceremony in 6 weeks and say, cool, you had a session, you cured it. You attack the problem in all the proper ways. That's not going to happen. This is a long game, and it's going to take a lot of picking those bags up every single day and doing that work every single day. You don't have to try to be racist in America or interact or to weaponize racism in America. Racism and white supremacy culture is the air we breathe here. It's in every single social system. It's in every single thing that we use on a regular basis, from education to transportation to nonprofits and all that. It's all built under a better white supremacy culture. So doing that work to begin the process of dismantling or to just make a full account of your own internalized racism and the things that you need to do. It's just going to take time and repetition, and there is no timeline where you're going to hit that button and say, boom, we are an anti-racist organization, or we are anti-racist field, or like that. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is people are going to say we are doing the work. And eventually, after people can keep saying they're doing the work, they'll actually start doing the work. And then we might start seeing results. But it's going to take a lot of repetition and a lot of doing that work and a lot of having these conversations, these very difficult conversations that shouldn't just be happening at your theater. They should be happening at your house. They should be happening, like the holidays are coming up, it's going to be it's going to be tight for a lot of people, but you're going to have those conversations. That's the only way we're going to move forward is if you normalize having those conversations and doing that work every single day.
Yes, exactly. And when it comes specifically to like theater companies, it's what work are you doing? Did you just post an image of Black Lives Matter and like a little square? Is that the extent of the work you're doing? Are you looking at your entire season? Are you looking at the artists you're employing? Are you looking at your board? What is the work that you're doing? Are you trying to, if you're having people who are speaking and doing work, BIPOC individuals, Black individuals, are you paying them for their labor?
Right.
These are the questions that we need to be asking.
We need to be asking before we say yes to working.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And who would anyone else? Yes, Sophie.
No, I was just going to say, to piggyback on what Bruce was saying, there are a lot of mainstream theaters and mainstream companies that are kind of scrambling and really taking internal looks to course correct. And like you said, dismantle certain practices and systems that they have been enabling through their institution. And I just have to say that I think what's of even greater import, because we know that there are going to be some institutions that it's purely optics, that they have no interest in really, like Bruce said, doing the work in a timely way. But I think that what's of greater import in questioning or even defending intention is examining impact. And I think one of the ways that these companies and these theaters, something that really needs to be on the table when they're in certain conversations and in certain dialogue, what really needs to be on the table is saying, okay, if we do this, is it so that ultimately it benefits us in the long run? What could we conversely be doing that would benefit those BIPOC institutions, companies, theaters that have been in the trenches for decade after decade after decade? I think that's the question, because so often these entities want to leapfrog over minority entities to kind of plant their flag on the top of the mountain and say, we solved it. Look at what we did over here. But there's no real championing or rallying around the efforts of these minority entities themselves, if that makes any sense. Because I think at the end of the day, what needs to be at the table more so than the buzz phrase of diversity, inclusion, and equity, we really need to start talking about autonomy. Autonomy for BIPOC entities and BIPOC institutions. Because I think what ends up happening a lot of the time is there's all this internal reform happening. And we lose track, we lose sight of, and I'll speak from the place of me as an African-American woman, being the founder of Support Black Theater, which in and of itself is a very intentional statement. I will just say we lose sight of Black entities and Black theaters.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Definitely.
And I think that we just have to be very mindful collectively. All of us have to be very mindful not to leapfrog over people who have been doing the work for year after year after year after year.
Yes. Amen to that. Does anybody else want to speak on this before we move on?
I mean, there's a question of how that happens. How are these are different entities going to stop applying for funding so they can go into a community and do that work, or like stop trying to be the middle person that takes the grant and then forms a partnership with the smaller community-led organization? Like, are they going to help facilitate that flow and redirect it? Say, yes, we could, but it really should go here. Like, how is that going to happen? Like, this is going to take a lot of people. It's going to be people stepping down from positions. It's definitely leaders that haven't been paying attention or haven't noticed that there was a problem within the theater or within any of these systems. Like, if you just noticed at the beginning of the pandemic that racism was a problem, all of a sudden, it's like, maybe you aren't the person that should be in the driver's seat of anything. Like, not saying you don't got no skills, but like, you shouldn't be leading. Definitely. Like, so how's it going to happen? Who's going to give up that slot?
No, I'm sorry.
Who?
Somebody was talking before me.
It was me, but go ahead. No worries at all.
No, I was just going to piggyback on what Sofina had just said. I mean, I think the resource allocation piece is gigantic. Like, I don't know what Ebony Rep's budget is, or Roby's budget is in LA. I know in Minnesota, when I was associate artistic director at Penumbra, I would tell people our budget was approaching $3 million, and we were big for an African-American theater.
Mm-hmm.
The Guthrie's budget was $38 million. I mean, you know, it's, and we were big in terms of a bunch of small theaters, but as you know, $36 million is so much different. We weren't even cracking three. And so and this goes to the point about leapfrogging people. Our infrastructure was so different. Our education department was so small, and we're trying to compete for grants on the same level. I got one person writing a grant for a new plaything. They got 8 people writing the same grant. You just got, I mean, it's just a resource allocation piece. And the question is, you know, who's going to shift that? How are those institutions going to start sharing? Because I do think the notion of leaping these organizations that have been in the trenches, you know, St. Louis Black Rep with Ron Himes, he's been there for 40 years. I mean, there's so many places that I've been and that I've worked and I've dealt with. African Continuum in DC, these theaters that have been existing, and now in DC, African Continuum, I have no idea what their budget is, but you can't compare it to Arena Stage. You can't compare it. Yeah. It's like my wallet and Bill Gates's wallet. Do you know what I'm saying? It's apples and oranges. So I think that's one of the things, and this is a great point. I mean, I don't know when that changes, when the institutional resource allocation shifts, and I don't know how that's going to change. Yeah.
I mean, I've been giving this a lot of thought, and one of the things that I'll just say, for example, one of the things that I truly believe should happen is that, for example, there are gatekeepers, right? We all know this. There are gatekeepers, and there are certain gatekeepers that don't necessarily want to admit that that is their role and their function. And I think that even though they claim to be allies and stand in solidarity, they have to really look at the ways in which they are continuing to operate as enablers. And I will just say, I hope this doesn't get me into too much trouble, but I'm gonna tell the truth and shame the devil. Something like rights houses. Mm-hmm. We need, as Black curators, to be able to tell our stories first.
Yes.
First. And I think that one of the things that mainstream institutions can do is just take a back seat. And we're not saying don't produce the work, but we're saying allow us to do so first. If it can't happen, it can't happen. But at least you allow a different type of trajectory that can have long-term change as a byproduct. You know what I'm saying? Because I know, for example, and I'm just throwing this is just, I'm literally just picking a play and throwing it out there. This has nothing to do with anything. But for example, if Ebony Rep wants to do Pipeline, you know, but it's being held by, say, CTG or the Geffen or whatever, there's a problem with that. There's a problem with that we don't have access to our playwrights. And so it's not saying that the CTG or the Geffens or the Pasadena Playhouses of the world can't produce Pipeline. Ebony Rep and CTG have very different audiences. CTG, for the most part, is sustained by a majority white subscription base. That's not the same audience as Ebony Rep. And so sometimes I think I would love to see some mainstream theaters kind of throw out change in that way, because it is really championing, like I said, and allowing the autonomy of the Roby, of Ebony Rep, of Waco, you know, of a BRC, a BCC, a Lower Depth. It's saying, you know what, you tell your stories first, and then we'll take them and we'll tell it, you know, to our audience. But I think that we have to look at things from all different angles.
Yes.
I think that's super important. And I guess what I would add to that is that these things won't change when the people who have power are the same people. And the front is that we'll bring in a whole lot more Black people and people into the cast, you know, into the next season. We'll do some plays by people of color, and, you know, we'll get some more staff in that, you know, are BIPOC. That's what I'm really concerned about, because that's what I'm seeing a lot. but the power is the board. Why?
Yes.
If the board are still all or mainly white people, and the senior staff are mainly or all white people, the only thinking that's going on is based in that way of thinking, right? So if the board decide what the season is, right? They have the yay or nay for the season. So if the board is not reflective of, our communities, it's never going to change, right? All that will happen is that they will throw us some crumbs and say, Black theatre companies, you go over here with this bit of money. Yes, we're going to give you more money. We might give you rights, but you're never going to be able to come over here, right? You always have to stay over there. And I think that what that does is just entrenches the racism that's there, because now they have a beard, because they can now say, oh, look, we have, 15 Bipoc people in the company instead of 2. And I know that because I see it in places that I've worked. I've seen it happening. And that worries me more than anything, because then the white supremacist structure just gets entrenched, because you don't see it. You can't see it as much. It's not blatant. And then, the other end of this is I do a lot of grant writing. Every system has to change right now in this country. Every system, as Bruce, I think, said, is based on white supremacy. In the philanthropy world, their boards are nearly all white. The people who manage the money are nearly all white. So, even like the way that they look at the grants that are coming in are not the same as if we had boards that were much more mixed. And the decisions that they make are coming from one established way of thinking. And so even if they look at a grant from a company that they can say, oh, this isn't a well-written grant, it's done carelessly. But this one here is well-written, which is something that we hear called merit. What is merit? That this grant is better written. But like we said, they have professional grant writers.
Yeah.
Here, they can't afford a professional grant writer. And
yes.
so time after time, they keep getting kicked out, because rather than philanthropy saying, oh, this grant isn't as well written, let me see if I can reach out to this organization and offer them grant writing skills and classes. They don't do that. It just goes in the garbage. So that whole system has to change, and where the power lies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's how we end up with companies where their diversity for their whole season is just all shoehorned into one August Wilson play. And then the other problematic extreme of some of those companies is then they end up taking the rights for the entire cycle of August Wilson plays from Black theater artists. So that personally, if you want to. All right, now we're going to move on to our next topic. So would someone like to speak to their experiences being a Black theater artist and the importance of representation and accessibility?
I guess I will take that. Oh man, God, my brain is racing right now. You guys have all brought up such amazing kind of topics and viewpoints that I'm now gonna stay focused on this one. I started my my journey as a theater artist in God, I'm not gonna date myself. I was 23. And I started working at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Was my first professional job out of undergrad at UC Santa Barbara. And I guess in the I wanted to go and work there because I wanted to work. And the artistic director at the time had come to our school and given a talk, and I was like, well, it sounds like people of color may have a space there. So I guess that's probably where I should go, because I had a hard time seeing where else I was going to fit in at the time. 17 years ago? It feels like the landscape was so different. And I took that job after I graduated without ever having visited Ashland, Oregon. And it was a bit of a shock. It was a bit of a shock to arrive in this little mountain town and realize that I was going to be there for all this time. But I also understood the importance of the experience of being one of these few artists of color who had crossed this kind of threshold, felt like it was still something that was difficult to do. And I'd also been kind of pushed on by somebody who told me that Black people didn't do Shakespeare. And I was like, oh, really? Well, let's see. I'm going to show you. So I understood that there was value to me being in kind of this all white space. For the most part, the audiences are majority white, and I don't know. I felt really compelled and driven to show Black life and experience through these older Shakespeare plays, and then they produce, the more contemporary shows as a part of their 11 play cycle as well. And during my second year I was playing 2 leading roles in A Raisin in the Sun and Comedy of Errors, and I was still a little non-equity actor, and it was incredibly empowering to be in that space and to feel my voice heard, and especially in A Raisin in the Sun. I could still be doing that play. I love that play with all my heart and soul. Lorraine Hansberry wrote a beautiful, perfect play. And it was just never lost on me, the importance of that. And especially since there were other artists of color that I was meeting that were from Penumbra and from places that I had never heard of at that point, as I was such a young theater artist. And I got to interact with them and learn from them and understand how to maneuver through the theater world as an actor of color, what that would mean, and how to play the game, I guess, because it's corporate theater. When you're working at a theater that's producing 11 shows over an 11-month time span, it was corporate theater. And after my season of doing a Comedy of Errors and A Raisin in the Sun, that was 200 performances of these 2 shows. And I asked to be made equity. Said, there's nothing really in the next upcoming season that I want to do. I think I just had the bravado of youth at that point. I was like, make me equity or I'm leaving. And I guess I see it through a different lens now as an adult. I understood my value, and maybe it was just coming off of playing, really being in the company of a group of Black actors who were performing at their highest level and who kind of instilled that in me as well. And it was like, after that, I knew my value, I knew my worth. And they said, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to go find a different non-equity person. You're released. And I was like, all right, fine. Moving on. And then they came back to me a couple of weeks before the season ended and said, hey, we've searched the whole country and we can't find anyone to take this role. We'll make you equity if you will stay and play these roles. And I did. And that was an incredibly powerful moment in my life, and a kind of a turning point as an actor. Just if it hadn't been for that group of people, these incredibly skilled artists who'd, in their 40s and 50s and 60s, who are, had come through so much more than I will ever truly understand. They gave me that. And I was able to stay throughout the next season and do that. But it was just a lesson that has carried me through. And what I really believe has given me the longevity to kind of stick through with this. After being there, I needed to leave a little 1 mile town in Ashland because I was 25 or 26 at the time, and came to LA and ended up one of my professors from college, who is also a beautiful African-American actor, sent me in the direction of the Independent Shakespeare Company, who was just like a little baby company at the time. And I was like, you know what? I know that I'm just going to keep going with this Shakespeare thing. It's my niche. And for whatever reason, I'm not having this barrier that I did in film and TV. Like, I could be an ingenue in Shakespeare. I could be accepted for whatever reason. And I think it was also that I just got incredible, I'm gonna like knock on wood, because there are other companies in town who did not respond to me at all in any way. Told me I was barely Black enough to be in a show that they wanted to cast me in. They're like, we love you for this role, but you're just kind of barely Black enough.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay. So I feel like I've been incredibly blessed to always kind of collide with incredible artists of color and opportunities to be in ingenue and leading lady roles that I don't think I would have had access to otherwise. I don't know that I would still be acting if it weren't for those opportunities. So I'm grateful to have found two companies, not only one, but two companies that gave me the opportunity, or I showed up and the opportunity, we collided. And there we are, Kareni. She's my daughter last year. God, that was special. Just to have Sabra, Kareni, and I, and then our other cohort, Bukola, and just to have the power of, again, being, it's very rare that I'm in a show where it's all Black women. And
yes,
the power of that, I have only experienced it twice in my 17-year career, which I think is a damn shame. And I'm knocking on wood that there will be far, far more experiences like that. God, I feel like I'm rambling.
I'll say that I also have a similar experience, and I have in the UK and here nearly always been in white spaces as a actor of color, and that was also the first time that I've been with Black women in that space. And can I say that the artistic directors, the people who founded that company, are two white people who founded Independent Shakespeare Company. So it's not impossible. It's not hard to do. It is entirely possible to have our stages look like our community, look like where we live, look like our city. And just like you, Aisha, I've also, for a lot of the time I've been in this country, I have been the diversity on the stage in many places. And, you know, I'm grateful for the amazing roles and places I've been able to be a part of, and the ensembles I've been able to be a part of over the years. And I will say, it is also, there is something about being the only Black person or one of like two Black people out of a cast of like 15 people that is super challenging, even if everybody is lovely, at which they are, lovely, supportive. I'm gonna you know, like lovely, supportive family, great.
Yeah.
It's still like, it's wearing to not have anybody who understands your experience. I find that hard.
Yeah, one of the things, although Aisha mentioned this, is I think this is really important, is mentor. I don't like the word mentoring or the whole thing, but I know because I've been doing this forever. I have had so many wonderful people who have helped me along the way. When I was in college, I was fortunate enough to have a professor named George Bass, who was, among other accidental wonderful things, Langston Hughes' secretary before Langston Hughes passed away. And so, I mean, I lucked into a lot of things. And then what, you know, I'm not going to call on people, but like people, yeah, I will call on people like Ntozake Shange to be sitting at a table with her, or to talk to August Wilson, or to go to Amiri Baraka's house, or to even have a conversation with Izzy Monk in Minnesota, Peter Macon, Marion McClinton, like people that you know who help you. I mean, because everybody's trod this land doing this thing that I was like, oh, I'm the only person to do this. They're like, nope. I did this in 1940, or Paul Carter Harrison, you know, with an Eagle Ensemble Company. I mean, it's just amazing to have these people in your life. And I'm always, I try to extend myself. If ever there's a theater artist who comes to me and she or they are, you know, feeling outside or an outsider, I mean, we talk and we walk through a bunch of stuff. And a lot of times their decisions, younger artists, are the decisions which I'm like, you have to eat. I can't tell you not to take that role in fill in the blank musical or fill in the blank play because you don't think that it's right, or you're the only African American person, or you're the only person of color. It's like, they paying you $1,000 a week. I mean, you know, go get on Broadway, swing it, make it happen. It's good. And then you go do something else. I mean, but I think that one of the and then of course, you know, Aisha, you mentioned film and TV. That's a whole other animal. That's a whole other here all day. Because I'm not even going to tell y'all. I got a bunch of stories. Sorry. Yeah, but I do think that one of the things that we can do at this moment to always be aware of is the way in which we continue to mentor each other in all these modes. I mean, that's really important. Yeah.
I guess I was just going to say, because like Aisha, I've always done a lot with Shakespeare. Yeah. And I would love to see the rest of you rather than just me right now. But, you know, done a lot of Shakespeare. And thank you. Shakespeare talks about race a lot in his plays. There's a lot of racism in his plays. There's a lot of allusions and just outright straight talk about race in many, many, many plays. And if you're in a space that's an entirely or mainly white space with a white director, and, you know, and for me, my experience has been like, you know, well, there's many that I've done, but if I think about a Shakespeare play, and for me, I might say, you know, oh, that's interesting that they talk about her being dark or dusky or being racist about her. And then people roll their eyes. Like, why you got to make it all about race? And I might say, if I'm in a space where a director of color or other Black people in the cast who will be like, yeah, we should talk about that, because Shakespeare wants to talk about it. Yeah. It's not like just me, Sabra, in Love's Labour's Lost. They're racist towards Rosaline in front of her freaking face and in front of her man. And, you know, luckily the director, when I did Love's Labours, wanted to talk about that. But generally people don't want to talk about that. Yeah. Shakespeare asks us to. So I'm like, it's not just, you don't only have to do August Wilson to make it Black theatre, you know. Everything can be Black theatre.
Amen. Yes, amen to that.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, of course.
Conversation about representation and accessibility and how important that is. I just wanted to say that that's why, you know, and piggyback on what you were talking about what is Black theater. I think we have to be very intentional about communicating that to the younger generations, because those formative years can really do a number on you if you don't have access to people on stage that look like you, or even to people that have been filmed that look like you. And I'll just say for me, I realized this, and I'm 43, so I didn't have this realization. It was almost like the trauma was was so repressed. I didn't realize this until about 5 years ago. But the high school, I used to go a half day to a performing arts school. So I did my academics in the morning, and then in the afternoon I would just be doing theater. And it was an amazing opportunity, but I only saw, you know, filmed performances of people that did not look like me at all, didn't sound like me, nothing resembled me. So I was told that this, you know, that tape or that film was theater. And then when we would do productions, I remember we used to have these Ben Nye, lost light. We used to have
the makeup. Yes.
Oh,
okay.
Mm-hmm.
yes.
So, when I was coming up, which this was back in the day, but when I was coming up, for me, we would, it would be dress rehearsal or whatever, and we'd be trying to find our foundation sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of the only Black people. So as the Black woman, I was looking for a foundation stick labeled tawny. I was searching through the foundation sticks for this tawny, and I knew one existed. There was only one. Every year I'd be like, where's tawny? And I'd be going through all the other foundation sticks of my white peers whose foundation name was Leading Lady.
Wow.
That was the name of the color of the foundation for my white peers. And I just remember this maybe 5 years ago. And I started thinking about these kinds of experiences, what I saw, because I didn't know what I didn't see. I didn't know what wasn't represented. I didn't know what I didn't have access to. I just didn't know it. So even though I was going to this school and explicitly learning about theater, I was implicitly learning to desire whiteness. And stayed with me for my entire college career. As I said, theater in BFA in theater, as I became a professional actress pretty quickly. And I continued to operate from a place of white adjacency because of what I had been told through the representation I was seeing. And you understand, and what access I did or didn't have. And so it wasn't until very recently that I was able to see it and to call it what it was and to start recalibrating my mentality, because I realized I had been psychologically conditioned to believe a certain way about theater, of what theater actually was. That theater that Dominic said, that theater with a capital T, what that actually was. And so, there's been a lot of work for me because I still catch myself operating from a place of white adjacency. So I think it's of the utmost for, yes, mentorship, but it's of the utmost for us to make sure that we go out and we really lift up and amplify Black voices, Black entities, Black theaters for the young people. So they know that there's a place for them. And like Bruce always says, it doesn't always take in full immersion. It can just be awareness.
Yeah.
It can just shift something and turn it on a dime.
And I hate to say this because I know this gets me in trouble all the time, but the truth of the matter is the theatrical practice in America, theatrical and filmic practices are based on anti-Blackness.
Yep.
So what I mean by that is and it's not just you, it's everybody. The way in which America's theatrical practice is predicated is on this anti-Blackness. And I just give two examples. The simple one is when people say Jim Crow. Jim Crow is a performance. It is a performance. It's not a law. It wasn't when people are like, where did the Jim Crow South? The Jim Crow was T.D. Rice, Wheel About, Turnabout, Jump, Jim Crow. It's a popular song. It was a popular mode. It was blackface minstrelsy. And what Jim Crow was it told America, it told all performers that to be an American meant that you had to be able to take that black thing off. You had to be able to take it off. Wheel About, Turnabout, Jump, Jim Crow was an international hit, as we all know. And then the other piece, which I hope film schools have stopped, the first great piece of cinema that they show, the first great piece of American cinema is Birth of a Nation. Which is The Klansman. The novel that it comes from is The Klansman, in which the hero is a Klansman. I'm like, when I put my brain around it, I'm like, what? So all of our practice is predicated on building this anti-Black understanding. And then we come into it and we're like, how come everybody's, pro-white? It's like, no, because the bedrock of this thing is anti-Blackness. So we have to keep fighting it in so many ways, or trying to get them to re-understand it. And it's really a challenge for me, because I know people are like, well, no, it's not that simple. But the thing that happens in both of those films, in the film in the 20s and in the 1820s with blackface minstrelsy and Jim Crow, America's trying to define itself. And they're defining itself in performance. So performers make the stereotypes that we talk about. We make, and I'm sure everybody's had this moment where somebody, well, I don't want to say everybody's had this moment. You go up for a role and they're like, you're not right for the role. there's no way somebody could go to an accountant and say, you can't play Chekhov, but you can go to a theater, audition, you know what I'm saying? And you're like, well, you can't do it because you're not Russian. I'm like, well, what's up with that? But you couldn't say that to an insurance salesman. But in our business, we build in racism all the time. We are the ones who make the problem that we're seeing in society, which is kind of, and that's how come I think for all of us, educators, makers, institutions, boards, that's the reason why theater makers and film constructors, I say we are the ones who have to lead this thing.
I mean, it's not just, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not just, yes, children for sure and mentoring for sure, but also communities that are systems impacted who don't have access to the theatre, who think it's not for them. And for me, it was super moving last year and the year before in Griffith Park with Indie Shakes, when we were able to bring people there who are technically still incarcerated, who are in what's called a halfway house in the last year of their sentence, who had never, ever, ever even thought to step inside a theatre. Like, that's for, rich white people. And, obviously because they've been incarcerated, they're mostly communities of color, those places. And so we were able to, when we're inside, we've been holding the space, I guess, and building the stage for them to play. And then they came back and they helped to build the stage for us to play, which was very moving for me. Wow. And then they came and watched the show, Shakespeare, right? And they were like, oh, I understood every single word. And that person there is like this person in my life. And this character reminded me of this, the very rich experience that they had coming to watch Shakespeare plays. And afterwards, talking to them and hearing them say, you know what, I think I'm going to go to the theatre down the road from me. I've never thought about going there. Or why can't I go to that theatre that's downtown, that posh place? I should go there, except it's like $75 to go. But, I feel like this is like super, super important if we want people in America to understand the power of the arts. It has to be accessible to everybody. We don't think of them. But they're the people who will support the arts. And my people are the ones who make the argument in the Senate, in the city, during the Obama administration. They're the ones who make the argument to fund the arts because they're like, we're not artists, but we transformed our lives through the theater.
Yeah.
And it has to happen. It has to happen in the community as well. Like there is taking, like putting people on a bus and bringing them to the space, but it also has to happen down the street. Like kids being able to walk to the theater in their neighborhood makes it a part of their lives early on, and not just kids, adults too. Like there's this, and it's been a really wild experience over the past couple of years, realizing how just how the white lens was built into your training, built into my training at least, or even like the way we assess theater and like the way that we make decisions on what is theater with it, what is capital T theater, and like it's not just about like even though right now there's the big question of like what is theater if we're not like in a space live in person. But it was like, but the question is, we've been asking that question, like what defines it? Because if you pop up theater like on the street in a neighborhood, and you're talking about what that neighborhood has been through, and it's right there in front of the people are right there, and is done by the people that are in that neighborhood as well. Like these are things that are like really transformative and makes you a part of the process, and even just being around so that somebody sees us doing that work. And that's why we need more of us in the schools, because the schools have no idea what to do with you as a person of color. Most of the time your teacher is not going to look like you, and we already know how much more of a chance you have to retain the information and get and have a fruitful experience in education if your teacher looks like you. That's not just in grade school; it's in acting school as well. It's in all the arts. Like just being able to see us doing the work makes it possible for more of us to do it. And that's why, as part of our mentorship, Part of it is just showing up, but also like I'm more excited about mentoring now that I've realized how much white supremacy was built into the training and the lens that I see art through, so that I can start doing that work to throw away what the rule book is, throwing away all these ideas of what it has to be and who gets to do it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what, and this is history, which always trips me out when you talk about the rule book getting tossed. The African Grove, this is a story. They did Richard III was the most popular play. And one of the reasons why they closed was the Park Theater, a rival theater, had them arrested. All of the black actors, all of the sable actors were arrested. And they were only released when they promised never to do Shakespeare again, which totally trips me out. Well, I was always like, what? But the other thing, there are two other aspects of the African Grove that trip me out. One is they paid all their actors in 1821, which I'm like, that's interesting. And the other thing, and this goes to a point, Saber, that you were making, is that they had a mixed race, mixed ethnic, mixed economic audience. Enslaved persons paid money to come to see shows. So you had enslaved people who were chimney sweeps and owned by people who came to see the shows next to free people. And it just kind of trips me out thinking about what that audience was watching Richard III. Why was Richard III the most popular play? And and the other piece of it is that the rivalry with the Park Theater is one of the reasons why they had to shut down, because you had these sable actors, as they were called in the newspaper, were arrested, and the key was they were only released when they promised never to do Shakespeare again. Of course they did, but I just think that's interesting to think about, like that's their point of release, the fact that they were doing this subversive form. I'm like, wow, that's kind of like compelling. But I think we just have to be across our economic lenses, our ethnic lenses. We've just got to be bringing people in as often as we can to see the work and just let them know that it's possible for them. That's it. Yeah.
People are super threatened by theater. Like, first of all, in Shakespeare's time, they had several black actors in London at that time, and black aristocracy, which you never hear about. And they had African actors coming to London, and it was like the thing, it was like the royalty thought it was like the thing, the hip thing. And then Commedia dell'arte, which is a lot of the training that I've had in Italy around the beginning. Shakespeare used a lot of commedia characters in his plays, but in like the 16th century, those actors were not like the actors from today. They were social justice activists, and they would bring their little cart in the village at twilight and satirize the upper classes. And they would get arrested for it all the time, even though they were just like doing comedy, but it was satire, very clever comedy. In the audience, the villagers would be like, revolutionaries after watching the theater. And so those commedia players would regularly get arrested, and sometimes they executed them for doing theater. Theater is super dangerous. And I feel like now we've corporatized it. We've, used the theater doesn't come from white supremacy. Theater comes from the people, but the Greeks, and we have made it. I know that's Bruce's train. We've corporatized it. And if you look at, Broadway, or even like the big local theaters like the Mark Taper Forum, all those places are corporatized. But there is this whole other part of theater that we need to center at this time. It's radical, it's revolutionary. And this is the, rather than doing theater light, trying to be as much like we can as it has been, even if it's on this, why don't we look at those people? And why don't we think, they were revolutionaries. We're in a time of revolution. Why don't we make theater dangerous?
Yeah. And I think one thing that we do need to talk about especially is we'll see a lot of these productions and plays that are essentially like Black trauma porn.
Yes.
And it's put on for predominantly white audiences.
On Broadway.
I was in a production with Hero Theater Company it seems like a million years ago, but it was in like October, and it was a retelling of Troy, and it was focusing on the homeless and displaced community in Los Angeles. And Hero Theater made a point on their own dime to bus in women from the Downtown Women's Center, and they came and they were able to see it. And it was so incredibly moving, like just hearing their reactions during the show, because they knew it. That was their story. They were getting to see their story and their truth. And they would come up to us after the fact and be like, ooh, when I was younger, I was you. Like, that was me. Or, ooh, you remind me of my daughter. You're bad. Like, and they had so much fun. So it shouldn't be, people should be able to see their own stories.
Yeah, and how powerful that is.
Our stories for white people.
Yeah, I mean, I remember once being in prison when we first started doing the program inside prison. And I remember a staff member coming to me and saying, I don't like what you're doing. And I was like, well, what am I doing? We're just doing a theater class. No one's doing anything bad. And they were like, yes, it's not good that you're giving them she called them inmates. I don't call them inmates. You're giving the inmates too much power. And I was like, oh, interesting. How are we giving them too much power? Don't they, like, they have less infractions. Their infractions have dropped by nearly 90% from doing the class. So what do you mean we're giving them too much power by teaching a theater class? And she said, they talk back now. They have an attitude, or they talk back to me now, or they seem to, like, they're more friendly with the gang who they're, you know, usually is their enemy. Now those people are like brothers. And now they kind of.
That's the problem?
That's a bad thing?
It's a bad thing because
wow.
It's systemic racism.
Yeah.
They need to know their place, and theater is like waking
it gives
up.
You a voice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Theater as a uniter, you know, like you bringing people together.
Yeah,
you better stop that.
It's difficult to control when people are together.
That is the issue right there, bringing people together and then realizing their power. And it's the same in juvie, you know, these kids who we do a civic engagement, the arts program in juvie for them to get them to vote. 86% of the people we worked with voted in the primary election through doing an arts-based workshop. We don't realize as artists the power of the arts, the power of what we have. We underestimate it, especially when we get in the Hollywood mind frame and we're like, you know, I'm 5 pounds too heavy, or, you know, I'm over 40 now, or, you know, I'm too light, or I'm too dark. All of that shit is like negates the power of what we have.
Yeah. So really quick, I know we're running over time a little bit, but this is such a good conversation. So our last question, this will be our last question before we open it up to questions. So if you are watching, I'm reading all of your comments in the chat. You all are awesome. If you have a question, put it in the chat. This will be our last one before that. So really quick, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but let's talk about Black theater specifically. So Black theater that is for us, theater that is by us. Why is it important that we nurture Black theater specifically?
I can talk to that just a little bit. I'll be really, really fast. I just think that, you know, we did talk about this a little bit. I think autonomy is of the utmost. I think it bears repeating. But even in founding and creating this organization, Support Black Theater, which launches this fall in Los Angeles, it's something where I've had to, you know, because it is a very specific title to the organization, there has been some question around whether this is kind of exclusive. And I just would like to say that it's not about exclusion. To support Black theater is not about exclusion. It's a statement of intention, and it's a statement of focus. Because I believe that if we as Black artists, Barbara Antier, actually the founder of the National Black Theater, she said, it is crucial for us to have a Black cultural art form. It is even more crucial than the issue of white racism itself, for us to build as Black artists, for us to build and to support Black theaters in our community. It is so crucial. And I'll say again, it is just about focus. It's not about exclusion. And if we don't champion and rally around, particularly in this time of the pandemic, when we have seen just on a much broader stage how systemic racism just affects all kinds of aspects. I mean, COVID has brought about just the racial disparity between, in terms of the effects of COVID-19 because of systemic racism. I mean, you just can't deny this is a time, I believe, for self-prioritization for Black people, because we cannot expect anyone else to do it. And so it's not a matter of saying, oh, it's about us, not them. It's not that. It's just a matter of making sure that we focus on what does it mean to support one another as Black people? What does it mean to tangibly create a new system? Because this old system did not have us in mind. So as we all know, there is such value in reform, in the course correct that's happening. There's value there, but I don't want us to lose sight of how valuable it can also be to create new systems, to create new paths, to create new lanes with us in mind. Because at the end of the day, if somebody is asking me to come into their home and to help them remodel, to use my paint, my hammer, my nails, my drywall, in fixing up and patching up a home that I was never in mind, I was only going to ever be allowed to rent and never own, I think I have to ask myself the question, what would it look like for me to have equity in a home, for me to have true ownership of a home? I'm going to take my labor and my materials there. First, not that we don't support your renovations, because we support it. My focus right now is on building a home with my materials. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll have ownership there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just like
Yeah,
lives matter doesn't mean other lives don't matter. It's the same thing.
No, but I think a crucial thing is, and I hate to use this word culture because it gets beat up, but let me be clear. Black theater is unique culturally. So I say this aesthetically. One of the things that we have, and this is like just looking at this stuff for the last 200 years of the stuff we've making, we as a people do not construct protagonist and antagonist dialectics. We don't do that. When you look at Raisin in the Sun, for example, which is classic African-American play, there is no antagonist in the play. Mama's not an antagonist. You might say that Walter is arguing with himself and does money make him a man. Another classic is Ntozake Shange's For Colored Girls. When I'm looking at Adrian Kennedy's Funny House, when I'm looking at all of the work that Black people construct in America, the protagonist-antagonist dialectic goes away. So what ends up happening is we make different cultural products. And I think one of the things which is really hard is when we're talking about, and I hate to make it as simple as the food metaphor, but that's the one I always use, either food or music. Funk music, rhythm and blues is what it is. French cuisine is French cuisine. It is different than Italian cuisine. And if I make French cuisine, I am not making pure French cuisine. I'm making New Jersey-based, Jamaican parented French cuisine. It can be delicious, but it ain't the pure French thing. You see what I'm saying? And so that's my thing with the Black theater. I'm always saying we need to make, and when I was at Penumbra, I was always trying to ring this bell about making Hitsville, USA, making it a place where we make the work that is uniquely ours. Hitsville was the Motown basement where Berry Gordy started Motown. When I'm thinking about the ways in which we make things different, but for me, a significant aesthetic thing is the fact that we don't do that protagonist-antagonist thing. I don't know if that's because of the cultural life that we've had since 1619 on this soil, or if it's just the way in which we decide to make our stuff. And when I look at all of these old plays, like from the 20s and Purple Flower by Marita Bonner, that's the thing that's missing. And I was like, oh, because we don't do that to each other. That's not how our spirit operates. We operate in a different way. And so we should keep finding what those aesthetics are. And we use our training and use it in that aesthetic space. But it's very different than a lot of the other kind of Western ways of making work. That was just, I just always got to say that. Yeah.
Yes. All right. So we're going to move on to our questions. So this is our first question. I'm going to show it for everybody to see. So the question from Brandon Hay is, what are y'all's thoughts on the word training now and how it's used towards Black artists by white leadership in negative tones? Any thoughts?
There are a couple. I mean, there are a couple of things which I think it's there are a couple of things about training. Like if you're talking about developing a craft set and you make that a synonym for training, I mean, I think what ends up happening is that what we have when we enter theater is we have human beings who are in space moving through time. And the actor, or the performer, I should say, is in trying to engage the body, the mind, the spirit, and to manifest typically a character. So there's a craft set that one has, which starts with breathing and being able to control one's body. But there's a series of things that you have. So there's a craft set which happens. I think it's interesting to use the word training. It's a simple but different idea where somebody says, "Oh, at UCLA you give a master's degree." Like, what does masters mean? And does it mean master and an unmastered? Like, what is the relationship of that? Even that language.
Right.
I guess you could change the language around it. But I think to be a performer, to be a writer, a director, a designer, an executive in any way around the theater, you need to gain a knowledge of history. You need to have the practice that's available, and you need to understand the theory behind that. So those three pillars are where I go always. And I don't know if that's training or if that's craft construction. I don't know what the right language is, but I do think that that's what we all need. And then when we take it, like, when we take it, whether it's learning how to play the piano, we can become Duke Ellington or Nina Simone, but we take the craft construction and we can manifest it the way we choose to. So I don't know. Maybe that's a...
Well, I mean, training could be all that. Training could be in a formal program, but it could also be just in years of work experience,
Right.
like experience you got from your mentor. Like that is training. And it always should be. And if it's being used in, if your training is in question because it didn't come to one of these, because you weren't christened by one of these white institutions, like I was, like I know it's a part of it. Like if someone wants to question whether your training is valid because it didn't come from that, well, shit, I want to question your anti-racism training too. Where'd that come from?
Yeah.
You get a certificate.
And that's the thing too. Like, first of all, hey Brandon. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of buzzwords. Sometimes they use training. Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, it's a bit raw."
Yes.
Or right. We know what that means. Or, "Oh, yeah, really nice, but just a bit green, that kind of stuff." It's like we know what they're saying. And I will just say, from someone who was trained in one of those white institutions, I'm doing my damnedest to undo all the training that I got. That's what I'm working on now. So I don't necessarily, the word is what you make of it, but I don't necessarily, I will not agree with anyone who strictly uses that to, in the affirmative of like, oh, did you come from Juilliard or NYU or whatever? And if so, then you have less value. I call BS on that.
Yeah.
I think right now I'm working with Steppenwolf, and we are doing like a training course, like a course for people. And Steppenwolf is super white. But the great thing is they have realized it and have really slowed down to try to understand how to change it. And they've delayed the course because what they realized that, oh shoot, I think I was the only teacher of color, maybe two of us. But, they were like, no, we can't go forward at this time like this. What do we have to do? And so we've had these really interesting meetings about training. And one of them was, well, there is the basic training that everyone has to do, voice and physicality, like you're saying. And, this is how we do it. It's like, when you learn how to read a play, there's a beat in a play, there's characters, there's a protagonist. But, the great thing about this discussion was there was an Indigenous woman there who's like, we don't approach theater in that way. We don't approach theater, the training, in the same way as you do. Our training is connected to Mother Earth, like how we look at the theater and the world is through our relationship with our environment. And so for me, it really was super exciting to be like, oh, now we have a Native American woman who's going to be on the faculty of this, who sees completely different approach to theater. but would never have been in a position of power at Steppenwolf in the past to be able to,
Yes.
we could receive that beautiful, thing. And I went to a school for the arts in England. I was the only person of color in the entire school. And, I was an actor and a dancer, and I was the only person of color. And so I did all that training, and the damage it did, like Safina's saying, as a ballet dancer, which I was at that time, for them to say to me, oh, it's going to be, oh, you are one of the 2 or 3 best dancers here, and you're going to have a really hard time getting work as a ballet dancer because their bodies don't look like your body. So you have to diet, and you have to get rid of, like, your boobs have to go, even though I was like a stick, because of what they think ballet was like. Same with Shakespeare, right? I'm the extraordinary person who's allowed to play leads in Shakespeare. But that is because of the training. And so to have the opportunity, I'm really impressed by Steppenwolf. They didn't have to do that. They're one of the most successful companies in the world. They did not have to slow down and try and really understand the damage of only white training. And the great thing is they were like, well, we'll have all the people of color, Black Indigenous people of color in the front, and the white people will be supporting. And I said, actually, I would really like it if you partnered with me, if we co-taught. But if we're really honest during the co-teaching as modeling for the students, that, we can talk as we're going about, that comes from white supremacy, or, how else could we approach this situation as a white teacher and as a person of color teaching together, which I think would be great for students, and scary as hell,
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Great. All right, so let me move on to another question. I think we have time for maybe one more or 2 more. This is from Henry. Hey, Henry. What are some alternatives to Chekhov and Meisner that are created by Black or BIPOC artists?
Is this a question about Meisner training, or are they talking about Chekhov the play? I mean, Barbara Ann Tier has a training, although she passed away. She had a mechanism of training that was unique to her and to the National Black Theater. And I will say there are so many, to the Chekhov space, so many writers, mostly women, I must say, of the early 20th century that are fantastic, which most people don't approach. There's a woman named Angelina Weld Grimke who wrote Rachel in 1916, and it reminds people of A Doll's House in some way, where you have this young woman who comes to a realization. But it's a brilliant, beautiful play written in 1916. I mean, there's so many writers. Ivor Aldridge's play The Black Doctor, which is 1847. Victor Séjour's play The Brown Overcoat is 1850. I mean, you have to go and find these works. And Black Theater USA is this book that's out of print now.
Yeah.
There are a lot of plays that are available, and I tell people all the time.
Yes, Bruce.
Yeah. Oh, you got
it's right here next to me.
I'm like, that's so cool. It's in my office. No, it's. I mean, there's so many. You have to find them, but there's a lot of work that's out there, and it's underappreciated in so many ways. And then Meisner technique, that's a whole much longer conversation.
Yeah, he says he meant the training specifically.
So he was meaning Michael Chekhov.
Michael Chekhov. Okay.
I tell you what though, like my first year teacher in drama school, Barbara Poitier, scared the shit out of me because she looked when she was an older Black woman who like got my ass in line like day one, like, and she received all that training. I think she did all the like method training and all that, but like I think it's a different experience depending on who's teaching or who that training is coming through. Yeah. Who these methods are coming through to teach you. I think it's a totally different experience. Like getting it from a Black woman, like totally like made me want to do the work. And she wasn't willing to pull no punches because she knew what I was up against.
Yeah.
So I think I don't know if there's got to be some other techniques out there, but like honestly, like I think it really just matters who you're getting it from.
Yeah, and also to not forget that in Russia at that time, Pushkin was around, and Pushkin was black. You know, I feel like my mother is Russian, Romanian, Jew. You know, so I've spent time in Russia, and yes, there's not that many black people, but there is, the theater is centered in Russia, right? They have 3 performances a day, 11, 12, and 8. Every single one is sold out every single day, even on the weekdays. So I think that, the importance of theater, and I've had all of that training, right? I've had method, you name it, classical, I've had that training. And, because it's hard to find a specific one that exists across the world that's as famous as those ones because people have been doing it, I've taken all those threads and, sieved it through my life. And I teach at UCLA and USC, and, I teach people threads of all of this in some new soup, that's been created through my unique experience working in prison. They've taught me everything I know, and myself as an actor, understanding what theater does to me. And so I do think that, we don't have to go necessarily back to the beginning again, but, working with an indigenous teacher, plus all of this other stuff to make a new approach, I think is entirely, why not do it? And then to also, like you're saying at the beginning, is that, there's many, many centuries of people doing this work, and also understanding that we have to, at this moment, work for a time that we will never see. What we're doing right now, we will probably not see the full expression of in our lifetimes.
Yes.
But that is social justice. You commit your life to working for people that you will never meet, and they will never, ever know your name. That's what the movement is.
No, that's real. I mean, I think, and I've said this to a lot of actors, I don't think that the problem is the Chekhov or Meisner training. I think that the problem that actors have is that they make the mistake of not bringing the rest of themselves into the room.
Exactly.
Their immigrant past, where they grew up, bring all of you into the room. And I think that's where we mess ourselves up with the training, because we get told that this training means that I got to cut off growing up in New Jersey, having Jamaican parents. Like you got to bring all of that in with you. And it adds, like you say, makes a new soup, makes a new whatever. And then, and then we just keep going forward.
And Henry's doing that already. Henry knows the answer to this because he's doing it.
Yeah, Henry, you already know the answer. Okay, the last question I'll ask, I know, Robert, you said it was actually rhetorical, but I'm going to put it up anyway because I think it's interesting and we can touch on it quickly, even though it's a big question. Why save institutions and systems that continue to fail us?
No, don't say it. Don't say it. Some people are going to fold because they can't get around racism. They can't get around having to do that work. They can't get around trying to figure it out, and they're going to fold. And I'm goodbye.
Yeah.
Straight up.
If you can't do the work, why are you here?
Yeah, you can't get around here.
Yeah, no, I think this is actually a great question. I tell people all the time, and I shouldn't say this. I've ruined my career 100 times. I don't care about institutions. I care about art making. I mean, I was commissioned by Steppenwolf in 1995 to write a play for the only Black actor at the time, K. Todd Freeman, who is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant actor. And he was substitute teaching in Chicago. I mean, one of the best actors I've ever come across. And he was the only Black company member. I've shot myself in the foot 1,000,000 times. But I think that what we shouldn't do is embrace the institution or the system. We should embrace the art making. And so the art making is trying to find truth. Truth is subjective. It's everybody's thing. But I think the thing about trying to find truth is you're not trying to find truth and explain it to white people. You're trying to find truth for self. You ain't trying to. I mean, and this is the thing. When I listen to Cecil Taylor or Grace Jones or Prince, I'm like, truth is the thing that's inside their work. When I'm looking at a Basquiat painting or when I'm engaged with Augusta Savage piece of sculpture, it's truth. It is, and it's something else. And so maybe the institution should go away. 50 years ago, we didn't have most of these institutions. The taper is only 50 years, well, 60, whatever it is, but it's not that old. None of these institutions are that old. So if they go away, they go away. But the art is going to stay. And that's where I'm always like, the art is what I always push people towards. Make the art, be Grace Jones. Don't try to be, an artistic director of some theater. Be somebody who you can't categorize. Be somebody who's once in a lifetime. That's it. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think we also have to be careful with abolishment. I work in prisons, so I sure as hell I want prisons to go away forever. Mm. Meanwhile, there are people who are incarcerated in those prisons who, I've had people say to me, you shouldn't be working in there because it's, the worst, most racist, white supremacist place on the planet, which is true. But meanwhile, there are people in there. There are people who, have said to me, I needed to have time away from society to sort my shit out, And so how can we both abolish and reform at the same time? And for me, the only way it's going to happen in America, and I say this as an immigrant and as a citizen, we have to do a truth and reconciliation process in this country, because you can't just move forward without accepting the truth. And we have not accepted the truth yet in this country. There's an unaccounted for Indigenous genocide and slavery that we have to slow down and admit happened, and then we can find new ways forward. Otherwise, Donald Trump is inevitable, because we're yoked to 400 years ago, because we've never faced it.
Yes.
I think that this is what artists have to do at this moment. Like you were saying, Dominic, we have ways to understand the truth. We don't automatically understand the truth, but we have ways, tools to understand the truth. And I've learned from COVID that, oh my God, I process the world through acting. I didn't realize that until I was like, oh, nothing's moving through me. It's all just getting stuck in me, like constipation. And it's like, I feel shit all the time. This is super unsatisfying, the Zoom thing. I process the world through acting. And so to make change, I have to be acting. I have to process the world. And I think that's what theater can do.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, I'm just going to share a few quick things for everyone before we leave. So we had our t-shirt drawing, and our winner for an Indie Shakes Summer Festival t-shirt this time is Hannah Hayes. You'll be hearing from us next week. Also, please join us next week as Carolina Zike will have her festival event titled Making the Magic of the Festival, Stories from Backstage. That'll be a week from today, August 29th at the same time, same place, 7 p.m. live stream. So Carolina, who is the producer of the ISC Art Break podcast, is going to dig into what makes the festival tick, and she's going to uncover backstage stories and explore what it takes to bring Shakespeare's plays to the LA community. Also, as many of you know, we have had to delay our hybrid production of Romeo and Juliet ever so slightly. And again, this is not related to any health or safety issues. We just want to bring you all the best experience possible. So the new live stream dates will be September 17th through the 20th, and the production will be available on demand that following week from September 21st to September 27th. And lastly, again, we couldn't make any of this happen without your support. So if you would like to donate to our Imagining Tomorrow Give Lively page, you can really easily text ISCLA to 44321. Or you can also go onto the ISCLA website to look at all of that as well. And you can also learn how you can become a roustabout, which, ooh, that sounds fun, and support ISC continually as a roustabout. So there's a lot of information on our website. Thank you again to all of these amazing, incredible panelists, virtual, yes. Thank you, everyone, for watching, everyone who stayed. I know we went over by like 15 minutes, so thank you so much, and have a great rest of your Saturday evening.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Bye.